I don't know kung bakit sinasabi that yung mahirap ako yung ambush interview. I'm always out in public. Pero siyempre, we're doing something else also. But I don't know why they say that because as I said, hindi naman ako pwedeng magtago. I'm always out in the public.
That was presidential candidate Ferdinand Marcos Jr. speaking in an interview with journalist Ruth Cabal about how supposedly receptive he is to facing the press. But members of the media tracking his campaign have time and again found it hard to even have access to the closely guarded Marcos Jr.
In his latest sortie in Cagayan de Oro, Marcos held a press conference but only to a number of hand-picked journalists. Their questions sent to the organizers a day before the event. Time for today's biggest headlines. I'm Gretchen Ho.
I'm Robbie Alampay. You're watching The Big Story. Although presidential candidate Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has been selective with his media engagements, he insists he is not that difficult to interview.
But video footage of several reporters following his campaign trail show otherwise, something News 5 correspondent Marian Enriquez herself has been experiencing on the ground. That big story in her report.
I'm always out in the public. That's presidential candidate Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s response to criticisms that members of the media find it hard to interview him. In an interview with CNN Philippines, Marcos Jr. was even seemingly puzzled.
I don't know kung bakit sinasabi that yung mahirap ako yung ambush interview. I'm always out in public. Pero siyempre, we're doing something else also. But I don't know why they say that because as I said, hindi naman ako pwedeng magtago.
2 months into covering Marcos Jr.'s campaign trail, it was no easy feat to talk to the presidential aspirant. His security team has always been aggressive in blocking reporters.
Sir, nakakayag na po ba kayo sa estate tax?
Sir, nag-ausap na po kayo ni President Duterte.
Sir, kasama kayo sa debate kay Senator Pacquiao?
Sir, ayun, hindi pa rin siya sumasagot. Simulado sa dalawang event natin kanina, hindi pa siya sumasagot.
Sir, would you discourage your supporters from doing negative campaigning? Araw! Ang sakit!
Even the international media find it hard to get something out of Marcos Jr.
Excuse me, sir! Can I give you my count? Sir! Marcos! Sir!
Can you really be a good president if you're not doing serious interviews? Are you hiding something from the public? Are you hiding something, Mr. Marcos?
Just yesterday, News 5 was excluded from Marcos Jr.'s Cagayan de Oro presser, his camp's first since launching his campaign.
Sir, you were raising concerns about the smartmatic data breach.
I cannot. Now? Parang mahirap ngayon. We'll do it again.
And yet, Marcos tells CNN Philippines that he plans to hold regular press briefings should he get elected. He is also not keen on having a spokesperson.
Haharap ako sa media. I don't understand but
That would be good for us to cover you
But may
directly.
spokesman ng presidente. Kaya naman na-explain ng presidente kahit na ano eh.
For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
What is in store for media? Should there be another Marcos administration? That big question and more with Vergel Santos, member of the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility. Good evening, Mr. Santos. Welcome to The Big Story.
Hi, Robbie. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Santos, Bongbong Marcos says he doesn't understand why media is saying that they cannot have access. Do you understand? Where is that complaint coming from?
We don't understand each other, apparently. I cannot understand how he can deny what is so obvious, which is keeping the media well off him. Because if he had not done that, we would have been we would have had all the answers to all the questions that we want to ask him. But we have none of that. But he simply doesn't want to risk being seen as he doesn't want to take disadvantageous questions.
Yeah.
No, risking answers that he might find would put him in a bad light.
Yes,
That's all.
and certainly many people, political pundits have been saying, obviously, no talk, no mistake. They've been very disciplined in that regard. But we're speaking about that in the context of Bongbong Marcos as candidate. What does all of this portend should there be a President, Ferdinand Marcos Jr.?
I don't know whether we will have a president in President Marcos at all. I don't think, I'm not so sure that that is a prospect, that even if he were elected, he would be president in the true sense of the word. And remember that he said all he wanted to do was protect his family, didn't he? So what do those words mean? To me, those words simply mean that possibly in exchange for presidential power, he would be very willing to simply be guaranteed that he and his family keep their plundered wealth. It's not about the presidency. That's why any promise of what he will do when he becomes president is an empty one. You know, why cannot he do that now? Say, when he becomes president, he will be answering all questions, he will be facing all media. Why cannot he do that now?
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Because he cannot do the right thing. He can only pay lip service to it.
Okay.
It's so easy to promise, Robbie. The presidency is very much off now. You know?
Okay, so let's
But,
get
right
back.
now, he's not going to do it.
Okay, now let's get back, Mr. Santos, to his candidacy. Right now, if we go by the surveys, he is the front runner, and he's a front runner despite having to handpick, despite not doing interviews, despite not doing the traditional media routes, and so on, and not giving media any access. That, coupled with the fact that he is performing well in the campaign, what does that all mean for the influence of media and the role of media looking forward, regardless of who wins?
Well, one, obviously, Mr. Marcos believes in surveys, notwithstanding the fact that the environment is not conducive to reliable surveys, you know, because of the fear that's going on around. Second, there is a certain measure of indictment that might be credible against the media. Some media are not trying hard enough. I have seen some media that Mr. Marcos met who were not prepared to ask hard questions. And therefore, these are the media that Mr. Marcos meet for mutual indulgence. You know, so there is something about the media is not free of blame here. The media are not trying hard enough. If Mr. Marcos doesn't want to answer questions, that should be reported and looked into in deeper ways. Like, why is he not asking, why is he not answering questions? Why is he not answering questions about his family wealth?
Okay.
Why is he not answering questions about his non-payment of taxes? Why is he not asking questions about lies that have been proven that he has propagated about his educational attainments, for instance? The media are not altogether free of blame.
Okay. Mr. Santos, maraming salamat po. That was Vergel Santos of the CMFR. Now, some members of the media have cast their votes in day one of the local absentee voting. Government workers and uniformed personnel joined them in a 3-day voting event. Gretchen tells us today's turnout.
Robbie, more than 1/3 of the members of the media assigned at the CCLEX Manila office have cast their votes. Now, according to COMELEC, 345 out of the assigned 815 media personnel flocked to the annex building of COMELEC in Intramuros. The remaining voters, meanwhile, are assigned to vote outside Metro Manila. In total, the Commission on Elections has approved over 84,000 voters, with more than 47,000 coming from the PNP, 34,000 from the Philippine Army, and 1,809 absentee voters from various government agencies. The three-day local absentee voting is set to continue until April 29, and approved absentee voters can proceed to their designated voting polls from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. to cast their votes. These are the other big stories tonight. The Omicron subvariant BA.2.12, now spreading in South Korea and the United States, has been detected in the Philippines from a Finnish woman who traveled to Baguio and Quezon City. In politics, the Lenny Kiko camp drops re-electionist Mig Zubiri from its senatorial slate after Zubiri openly endorsed Ferdinand Marcos Jr. for president. And the Lens presidential candidates would go to woo voters. A now viral video of Manila Mayor Moreno in a sortie in Aklan after the break.
watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. With less than 2 weeks left to campaign, presidential candidate Leni Robredo is working double time to reach voters, especially with her survey numbers still trailing frontrunner Ferdinand Marcos Jr.
Banking on what they're calling a people's campaign, the Leni Kiko team has taken their strategy from crowd-drawing rallies to a more personal house-to-house campaign. A look back at Robredo's campaign journey the past 2 months in this report by mobile journalist Jacob Lazaro.
In every sortie, Robredo meets with church leaders, local officials, and draws huge crowds to her rallies. On stage, the vice president points to what she calls receipts or resibo, her work in COVID response, and her track record at honesty.
Talaga pong ako bumababa sa laylayan. Ang paniniwala ko po napakahalaga nito. Kasi yung mga proyektong makakatulong sa inyo, yung mga nagmula sa isang leader na nararamdaman yung kahirapan na pinagdadaanan ninyo.
Robredo has also broken grounds outside her strongholds, like pulling huge crowds in Manila and Pampanga, where she lost in 2016. Most surveys show Robredo trailing behind survey frontrunner Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in almost all regions, but Robredo has been putting up a fight in what experts see as possible battleground regions like Calabarzon, Metro Manila, and Cebu. Robredo and her running mate Senator Kiko Pangilinan call their strategy the People's Campaign, that experts say is unprecedented in terms of volunteerism. Robredo has also received the most endorsements from celebrities, universities, and civic organizations.
Sa gabi nito, opisyal kong ini-endorso ang susunod na Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas, Leni Robredo!
The consistent climb in her numbers has made her the only viable candidate against a Marcos return.
Ako po personal na kahit ayaw sana naming magkakapatid na tumakbo pa siya, naniniwala din kami na yung panahon, yung mga hamon na hinaharap natin ngayong 2022, yung tingin din po namin siya yung pinaka-kwalipikado na maging leader ng bayan.
Totoo po yun!
Wala si nanay. Si nanay, may second demotion ako dito.
Her daughters and volunteers have taken to house campaigning.
May magandang programa po si Madam Moreno para po sa mga seniors. Papakailangan po natin. Sabi ko rin si
The odds are stacked against her, but Robredo has doubled down, even tripled down on the effort, in what appears to be the most physically punishing campaign season in recent years. Mobile journalist Jacob Lazaro, we are One News.
And still on the Leni Kiko ticket, re-electionist Zubiri has been dropped from their senatorial slate after the senator openly endorsed Ferdinand Marcos Jr. for president. Office of the Vice President spokesperson Barry Gutierrez says Zubiri's endorsement of Marcos was a violation of the agreement with all guest candidates. The Leni Kiko tandem will move forward to the polls with an 11-man senatorial slate. Zubiri was quoted calling Marcos Jr. our president in a Bukidnon Unity Team rally last March 31. Robredo supporters have lobbied to remove Zubiri as he has not attended a single Leni Kiko rally.
Hollywood actor Tom Holland's movie Uncharted has been pulled out from Philippine cinemas over a scene inaccurately showing a map with Chinese claims to the West Philippine Sea. The move came after the Foreign Affairs Department had requested the MTRCB to re-evaluate and pull out the movie's screening in the country. DFA says showing a map of China's so-called 9-dash line runs contrary to national interests and stressed that Beijing's claim over the South China Sea has long been settled in the landmark 2016 Arbitral Tribunal. Time for another quick break. More of the big stories when we return.
still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. Health experts warn of a possible COVID-19 surge after the May 9 polls, prompting Malacanang to remind the public to practice minimum health protocols.
This as the first case of the highly transmissible Omicron subvariant has been detected by the health department. Maricel Halili with this report.
A 52-year-old Finnish woman who arrived in the Philippines last April 2 is the country's first case of the Omicron subvariant 2.12. Arriving asymptomatic, she traveled to a university in Quezon City and Baguio for a seminar. She eventually tested positive for the virus after experiencing symptoms. She has since recovered and is now back in Finland. The Omicron subvariant 2.12, while still not a variant of interest, has been spreading in South Korea and the United States. This comes at a time when groups have been warning of a possible surge in COVID cases come next month. The Octa Research Group, for one, sees cases hitting 5,000 a day should the subvariant enter the country.
Possible na yung surge ay maging may similar trajectory na sa nakita natin noong January na mabilis siya makapanghawa, mabilis dumami at baka mabilis rin bumagsak yung bilang ng kaso.
Aside from subvariants, the country has to deal with possible super spreader events during the elections. The president himself has urged strict compliance to health protocols.
Remember the things that government wants you to follow so that hindi masyado tayo mahirapan and we will prevent another surge.
Health protocol violations have spiked. The Interior Department recorded 85,000 people who wore their masks improperly, up from just 28,000 2 weeks ago.
Tinatawag din natin ng mga LGUs, ang mga campaign organizers na tumulong sa pagpapatupad ng minimum public health standards.
The Health Department is also urging more Filipinos to get vaccinated. 3 days into the rollout of the second booster dose for the immunocompromised, only 1,000 have gotten their fourth dose. What's worse, 3.6 million doses of donated vaccines from the COVAX facility have expired.
I-replace po ng COVAX facility. Nag-meeting na po kami kahapon at meron na po silang sulat sa atin.
Authorities now want health frontliners, senior citizens, and even OFWs and seafarers to be prioritized for the fourth dose. For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
Presidential bet Manila Mayor Isko Moreno has been busy wooing crowds during his campaign rallies.
To keep his Aklan crowd entertained, Mayor Isko jumped off the stage, but his landing was not quite there. Let's watch this.
Joins parang mafia.
May effort naman eh.
Oo, lahat eh. Talagang kailangan ng additional effort lahat ngayon.
Oo, at saka baka pagod na. Kaya nahulog. Pero it's very close. Like we've been mentioning, 12 days to go before the elections. And I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot more moves like those to convince voters to switch sides.
Oo. But ako, I'll have to make up my own decisions by tomorrow. At isa ko, pwede na akong bumoto tomorrow because absentee voting, that's our way of also reminding people we're voting early because we'll have a big coverage for election day pagdating ng May 9 and even in the run-up to that. So watch out for that. And we're all voting ahead to make sure we can give you the best coverage as well.
Dalhin mo yung kodigo mo, ha?
Meron na, nakakita na. Meron pa kailangan pag-isipan.
Well, that wraps up today's Big Story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And get vaccinated, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. We are One News. Have a good evening.